We start with a flashback, as some soy boy called Sauron tries to motivate a bunch of crusty orcs to worship him as ruler so they can go enslave Middle-earth already. But unfortunately, he channels the energy of Zach Brannigan during his motivational speech and casually admits that loads of them will die in the process, and then makes a shocked Pikachu face when they all turn on him in favour of living and crowning of his right-hand man Adar instead, and soon carve him up worse than Katie Price's body on a trip to Turkey.
Bruh.
Anyway, after the Master Manipulator totally fails to manipulate a bunch of brainless orcs into liking him and becoming his army of nameless disposable henchmen, the all-powerful Sauron fella then becomes some kind of Venom cosplayer whilst recovering over a period of years or some shit. But after handily coming across a passing ginger and gobbling her up inside her own ride, Sauron is somehow totally reborn as a Halbrand fella from Season 1, as we then see how he bumps into a tribe of humans and hitches a ride with them on a boat, until that naughty waterworm shows up what came out of the literal blue back in Season 1, Episode 2. And after leaving the leader to die and nicking his crest so he can later pretend to be the heir to the human throne or some shit, we see him meet up on a small raft with that Galadriel bird. You know, budget Kate Blanchett with resting bitch face, who had just got literal cold feet about going to the elf version of paradise and instead jumped into the middle of the ocean because reasons. Anyway, after 22 minutes of the most boring flashbacks since The Acolyte dedicated 2 entire episodes to lesbian space witches and chocolate twins with terrible acting what no one gave a stuff about in the first place, we cut to the opening title card, as budget Kate Blanchett with perpetual PMT promptly chases her flat-faced mate Elrond through the woods whilst trying to fondle his man pouch. It's just steady. Because turns out he's got them rings of power thingies what finally turned up 7 hours and 58 minutes into an 8-hour series last epi. And after taking them back to King Gil-galad and snitching on her doing a bunch of bad things like letting their arch enemy Sauron wander about their gaff for days, the king just can't believe she let herself get manipulated by a bona fide Dark Lord and then let him roam about their secure base at Eregion to do God knows what. Because she confirms that the mysterious chap was indeed no man, and instead simply
masquerading as one.
And before he can say, sounds kinda like that Elliot Page fella, Elrond totally bollocks her for being such a fucking mug and no doubt thinking with her fanny, and he can't hand over the rings because they're likely now totally tainted with naughty darkness and stuff, and so insists they must be utterly destroyed, before even more of them get mugged off by the influence of generic white men. So naturally, he disobeys a direct order from his king and promptly hauls himself over a fucking waterfall. Which, to be fair, is the most relatable thing in this bloody show, given I too want to sling myself over a cliff sitting through this utter drivel. Anyway, over in Mordor, phony fakey Sauron hands himself in so he can finally confront that randomly recast Adar fella, but just ends up being told,
You're not that guy, pal. Trust me. You're not that guy. Okay.
and promptly gets himself smacked up and imprisoned after he refuses to tell him all about Sauron's return. Whilst elsewhere, the first female Frodo with a bird's nest in her hair, aka Nori Harfoot, tries to get her new giant friend to open up about his weird dreams already. Because this trip over to Ruin friggin' sucks a bag of dicks, given they're totally lost and can't stop wandering about in circles in the middle of the fucking desert. And after harassing innocent trees and blowing them to Kingdom Come for shits and giggles, and also food, he warns a homesick Nori that they're totally being followed. So stop giving Klaus Schwab a right raging boner by owning nothing whilst happily munching on a bunch of bugs, and friggin' hide already. Meanwhile, Sauerbrand channels the energy of your local Pakistani and tames a wild wolf dog thing by offering up a bone of his own.
Disgusting!
Whilst back in the sunny elven kingdom of Linden, we meet a new character called Círdan, who's a master crafter and also the oldest and wisest of all the pointy-eared freaks, as Elrond asks him to take this bunch of rings and destroy him already, and don't even think about taking him to the local pawn shop to make a few quid, son. Gil-galad then gives his lackey a note to deliver to Lord Celery Brimbor, to totally warn him that handsome Halbrand is really a murdering arse nugget with a spiky helmet, reborn in current day.
No way.
Yes, fucking way. Whilst Gladys surmises her flat-faced ex-buddy chum is likely going to be seeking out the only other ally he can trust. And no, not Cassandra from Doctor Who, but Círdan. So they hightail it over to his gaff to confront him, as she tells L. Ron Hubbard to stop being such a pussy-o and trying to destroy perfectly good jewellery, because they took freaking hours to make, bitch. And besides,
With 3 there is balance.
and before he can say, so you mean there's a power in many,
Power of one! The power of two! The power of many!
naturally, he don't want her to have them, and insists that much like the Tolkien estate selling the IP rights to a soulless tax-dodging capitalist corporation remotely devoid of any moral worth, all they'll do is corrupt and bloody ruin everything.
Fact check?
That's true.
Anyway, after Nori and Gandalf fuck about in the desert some more, and also reunite with their gender-flip Samwise Gamgee pal because reasons, they realise they can find their way and stop walking in circles if they just sing a little song with the correct lyrics. Not a joke.
Black sand for my bed! I trade all I've known for the unknown ahead.
Gay!
Meanwhile, and in a shocking twist what no one could ever see coming, fate interrupts Círdan from disposing of the titular Rings of Power in the premiere episode of which this entire new show is fucking based around, and soon gets distracted by shiny things and totally tempted by the rings himself.
Oh shit, not good.
Adar then whines on about his tragic backstory, and how his Lord Sauron once offered him wine under the moon while he graciously drank and shit.
Okay.
So, after ignoring his captor's story, boasting about gulping down another man's fluids, Halbrand finally reveals to him how Sauron has come back in a new shape. And he don't mean circular like Sam Smith in a bunch of bizarre photo shoots recently.
Oh, good lord!
But they don't know what or whom. So he just says, if you release me, bro, I'll go up to the pointy-eared palace and seek him out for you, given I've totally got the trust of the elves. And before he can say, if you have the trust of the elves, why are you aligning with me, who just keeps torturing you with physical violence and homoerotic sob stories, he says it's a done deal, son, and promptly makes him swear allegiance with his face in the dirt like a riot cuck. Gah, I haven't seen more of a lack of self-respect since supposed countercultural rebel and Foo Fighters lead singer Dave Grohl had an online meltdown about the naughty Orange Man legally licensing the use of his song for his recent rally last week.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Anyway, after the elves do some more cringy singing,
Shut up, you slag.
Círdan crashes the party to show off his fancy new gear. And the elfy flat-faced fella, what looks like he fell face first between a sandwich presser, just can't believe his last remaining mate also betrayed him for the second time this week. Cause he jumped off a fucking cliff and swam all the way over to his remote lake house to hide them ring things. And instead of destroying them like he promised, this fucker's now turned up flaunting the glitzy rocks like some back alley pimp.
What a fucking liberty!
And after he gives the other two to King G, old Butterfingers totally drops the things, which leaves one of them rolling towards Gladders, who naturally also gets distracted by shiny silver things and totally whacks it on. And is somehow allowed to keep it, despite her king demanding them back all leppy, and just because it happened to fall at her freaking feet a few seconds ago.
What?
But given these things all bring the trees back to life, and finally make this frigid bird freaking smile for once in this show, they all gather around to celebrate and totally admire each other's booty gems. And we end with Halbrand arriving at the gates of Eregion to negotiate with that celery Brimbor fella, who, in the presumable absence of the warning note not yet delivered by King G's lackey who had one freaking job, struggles to decide whether he should let in this stinky human what probably smells of wet dog and goo. And that's it. That's the first epi. Though my favourite part was having to wait 2 years for the second season of a $400 million show, and then sitting through what amounts to a 1 hour 16-minute counselling session, essentially watching a moody bloke try to get over his past trauma and also befriending a therapy dog, whilst a bunch of unlikable twats with deformed ears fight over the ownership rights of jewellery. Well, I'd say that's money well spent, Jeff. Because the last time I saw something end with a bunch of weirdos staring at each other's rings, I just said thanks for the biscuits and vowed never to go back to them orgy tasting nights in Soho. But anyway, that's the plot and that's your lot. Considering that bell thing so you don't miss the roast of the rest of the season. Tell me if you like this show in the comments if you have time, and I'll admire your ring in the next one.